Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 231 and it's titled Mahadi Mayhem. And that is a bit of an unfortunate name because the deck was named before the Mayhem mechanic from the newest Spider-Man set. So I do apologize for any confusion, but I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in just a minute. First off though, if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from Scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card is going to be Mahadi Emporium Master, which is 1 black-red for a 3/3 legendary creature devil. I know the card says cat devil. It has been errated. It is now just devil. And at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each creature that died this turn. So nice and simple, but it has a couple of things it wants us to be doing. And notably, Mahadi is a legendary creature, so that does mean that they are in our command zone this week. Because obviously, if we can have a legendary creature as our random card, we gotta build around them as the commander. So let's take a look at some of our themes for this deck and try to pick apart what exactly we're trying to do and how we want to make Mahadi work. Starting off, our first theme is probably the main theme that I put into the deck to try to differentiate it from other Mahadi decks, and that is devils. Since Mahadi is themselves a devil, this is a great way for us to build around a creature type that doesn't really see a lot of play and doesn't have a ton of synergies among themselves, but a lot of what devils do kind of tie into some of our other themes. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll break down the other themes as we go. Starting off with an example of a devil for the deck, we have Spiteful Prankster, which is 2 and a red for a 3/2 devil. As long as it's your turn, Spiteful Prankster has first strike, and whenever another creature dies, Spiteful Prankster deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. So a lot of devils are going to care about dealing 1 damage here and there, and about things dying. So that works pretty well with Mahadi, because Mahadi wants things to die, and Mahadi's going to make treasures, being able to play into the devil's ability and caring about when things die. Now with that being said, since Mahadi makes treasures and cares about creatures dying, that means our second theme is artifacts. And more specifically, we want to lean pretty heavily into the treasures that Mahadi makes, because we're going to use those as our main source of ramp and our main source of value, but it also means that those artifacts at some point are going to have to enter the battlefield. And that is where Reckless Fireweaver comes in, because he is 1 and a red for a 1/3 human artificer. When an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if we have, say, 5 creatures die on our turn, we then make 5 treasures in our end step with Mahadi. All 5 artifacts will come in. Reckless Fireweaver will do 5 damage to each opponent. And as weird as it sounds, 5 is actually a pretty small number for this deck. It's not surprising if we can get a ton of triggers every single turn and kill our opponents very, very quickly. Finally, though, we get to the last theme of the deck, which is going to hopefully tie these two things together, which is sacrifice. There's actually quite a few devils that care about sacrificing and killing their own, creature type. But in order to make the most advantage of that, we need to make sure that we are actually killing our own creatures on our turn, so that way we can get the treasures from Mahadi. And so a good example of a way that we can sacrifice our devils, but also something that wants to do it on our turn, is Body Dropper for a black and a red. It's a 2/2 Devil Warrior. Whenever you sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Body Dropper, and you can pay a black and a red to sacrifice another creature and give the Body Dropper menace until the end of turn. This is one of those abilities that we can use at any time. It's nice to just have the sacrifice outlet, but it's also a great way to make a giant threat that can kind of push through the last bit of damage we need after we've been pinging our opponents with Spiteful Prankster, with Reckless Fireweaver. Then we just have a giant body to close out the game. So those are all of our themes for this week and really what ties this deck together. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at some key cards in the deck. And these are cards that really synergize super well with each other, but are also cards that just kind of make the deck work or are kind of like the MVPs of the deck. So starting off, our first key card is going to be Lolth Spider Queen. And Lolth is 3 black for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Lolth. And whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lolth. That is going to be incredibly important since we have so many creatures die. Then she has a 0 ability. You draw a card and lose a life. -3, create 2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach. And -8, you get an emblem with whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by 1 or more creatures you control, if that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference. Now, Lolth is one of those cards that really synergizes with every piece of our deck. In, of course, the actual lore, she would be more of a demon, not a devil, which is unfortunate for what we're trying to do, but still fits the vibe overall. And she really synergizes with us sacrificing our creatures. She helps us draw cards, she helps us make more tokens, and she can give us the emblem if we get to that point. We will most likely not get to that point, as we will probably be too busy drawing cards and making spiders, but it's still something that we can use in case the game goes long. Moving on to our second key card of the deck, this one is Alchemist's Talent. And Alchemist's Talent is 3 and a red for an enchantment class. When it enters, you create 2 tapped treasure tokens, already pretty solid, doing alright. Then you can level it up for 1 and a red, and treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. That is really why this is in the key cards. Letting all of our treasures sacrifice themselves for 2 mana is incredibly powerful and pretty much just wins us the game almost immediately. But if we can get even more out of this, at level 3 for 5 more mana, whenever you cast a spell, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it, this class deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to each opponent. So if we are generating a ton of treasures with Mahadi, and then giving them the ability to sacrifice for 2 mana, we can probably cast just about every card in our hand. And if we're doing that, we can very quickly drain out the table, sacrifice all of our devils, drain them out some more, and just continue the process. So Alchemist's Talent is kind of the main win condition for this deck, but we have a lot of stuff that does very similar things. And then finally, we get to our last key card, which is Mirkwood Bats. And this is, again, a very simple card, but a very efficient one for this deck. It is 3 and a black for a 2/3 bat. It's got flying. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses 1 life. So the nice thing about treasures is that we will create them. They are tokens. They will trigger the Mirkwood Bats. And then in order to make the mana with them, we do have to sacrifice them, meaning we will then sacrifice a token and make each opponent lose another life. This is going to be incredibly efficient because if we just go to our end step and make 5 treasures, then sacrifice those 5 treasures, we've done 10 damage to the entire table. It does not take long for us to be able to make enough treasures to drain out the entire table with the Mirkwood Bats, and it's definitely one of the best win conditions and most efficient win conditions in the entire deck. Anyway though, that brings us to the end of our key cards for today, and the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. And these are cards that synergize really well with each other, and in some cases can be value engines or win conditions, but a lot of times they're just fun cards that I want to highlight. So, starting off with our first cool interaction, we have Zurzoth Chaos Rider and Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin. Zurzoth, 2 and a red for a 2/3 legendary creature devil. Whenever an opponent draws their first card each turn, if it's not their turn, you create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. Then, whenever 1 or more devils you control attack 1 or more players, you and those players each draw a card, then discard a card at random. Now, Zerzoth is a card we've built around on the channel before and is a deck that I have in my personal collection. I absolutely love Zerzoth. He is one of my favorite commanders. So whenever I'm given a chance to play Zerzoth, I definitely will. But the nice thing about this deck is that we are a Rakdos deck. We are not confined to mono red, meaning we can use Zerzoth and his devil creating abilities with Obnixilis Captive Kingpin, which is 2 black-red for a 4/3 legendary creature demon. Unfortunate creature typing, of course. It's got flying, trample, and whenever one or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, put a +1/+1 counter on Obnixilis Captive Kingpin, then exile the top card of your library, and until your next end step, you may play that card. The nice thing about Zerzoth's Devils is they do 1 damage whether they're attacking or whether they're blocked, and then they deal the damage when they die. So they will always trigger Obnixilis, and if we can swing with 3 Devils, 1 at each opponent every single turn, we will trigger Zerzoth. Each of those opponents will draw a card, then discard a card. We will make 3 Devils, and then all of a sudden, we are triggering Obnixilis 3 times every single turn, getting what is essentially 3 card draws, even though we're exiling them, every single turn. Adding on to that, the fact that Obnixilis continues to grow, he's a flying trample threat. This puts a lot of pressure on our opponents, gives us a lot of card advantage, and we're really not doing anything other than just attacking. We are playing out our game plan as normal. So this is a great way to close out games and a great way to generate value. Moving on though, to our second cool interaction. This one is between Krenko, Baron of Tin Street, and Devilish Valet. So Krenko, 2 and a red for a 3/3 legendary creature goblin, has haste. You can tap him and sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control, and whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 1 red. If you do, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains haste until the end of turn. So with our treasures, we can actually sacrifice the treasure to make a red mana, and then immediately use that red mana to pay for Krenko's ability, essentially just converting our tokens as treasures into tokens of goblins, which is a very powerful way to end the game, especially because they all have haste, they're all going to come right in, and we can still hold up 1 treasure to put a +1/+1 counter on all those goblins with Krenko. Plus, if that's not enough, we still have Devilish Valet, which is 2 and a red for a 1/3 Devil Warrior. It's got Trample, Haste, and Alliance. Whenever another creature you control enters, double Devilish Valet's power until the end of turn. It does not take a ton of goblins for Devilish Valet to become a lethal threat, because 1 goblin makes him a 2 power, then 4, 8, 16, 32, and then lethal. So it would only take 6 goblins entering the battlefield for Devilish Valet to kill someone from their starting life total. And if that alone isn't going to be enough, we again have plenty of ways to ping our opponents throughout the course of the game. We'll probably have more than 6 treasures, so we can probably make more than the necessary amount of goblins, and the goblins can swing at someone else. They can still take out other players, while the valet is knocking out probably the biggest threat at the table. So I'm a big fan of this combination. It can sometimes lead to a bit of a feel bad if you knock one player out and then are unable to take out the others, so do be aware of that playing this deck, but still very powerful and definitely worth mentioning. Finally though, that is the end of our cool interactions, so the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the price of the deck. And today, our total deck price came in at $55.88, with the most expensive card being Liliana Dreadhorde General at $6.99. Liliana is a very powerful planeswalker and definitely one of the best card draw engines in the entire deck, because she is 4 black for a 6 loyalty legendary planeswalker Liliana. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. That's going to be happening quite a bit with this deck. Then she has +1, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. And -9, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type, then sacrifices the rest. Now, I don't anticipate Liliana ever getting to Ultimate. However, if there's any deck that can protect her enough to get to the ultimate, it might be this one because of the amount of tokens and mana we can produce. And then if we ever do hit her ultimate, we just pretty much win the game because there's no way our opponents are going to be able to claw back when they're stuck to one land per player, plus whatever else they've got going on. So that is probably the best card draw deck, but we can cut it if we need to. On the other hand, if you're looking to increase the price of the deck, there is a card I would recommend putting in, and of course, a card I would recommend cutting if you wanted to replace it. So the card that I would recommend putting into the deck this week would be Goldspan Dragon, and the card I would recommend cutting would be Gang of Devils. So Goldspan Dragon is 3 red for a 4/4 dragon, flying, haste. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token, and treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. This is, again, like Alchemist Talent, a way to let our treasures create double the mana. And if we're creating double the mana, we can very quickly end games because we are going to have so many treasures and so much to do with it that there's not going to be much our opponents can do to stop us. Now, with that being said, though, it does have to replace a card in the deck, and the card that I would recommend replacing is Gang of Devils, which I actually debated on quite a bit as I was looking through this deck, but it is 5 and a red for a 3/3 devil. When it dies, it deals 3 damage, divided as you choose, among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures and or players. Now, this is a very expensive card for what it does. It essentially creates 3 of our 1/1 devil tokens stapled together. But unfortunately, instead of it being 3 mana, it's 6 mana. And it is a very expensive card to get into play. And it doesn't do quite enough on the battlefield or when it dies. It's not quite big enough as a 3/3. And it doesn't quite do enough damage when it dies for 3. So if we could replace that with Goldspan Dragon and essentially double the effectiveness of our treasures, I think we would be in a much better position overall. Although, that now brings us to the end of our deck tech for today. And before we get into a game, because obviously we got to see how this deck performs in a game, I want to take a second to shout out all of our current patrons and channel members. A huge thank you to everyone who supports us on either of those 2 platforms. And of course, if you cannot join us on one of those 2, then you can always just like this video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit. But if you're interested in joining our Discord where we can brew up a lot of decks together and also play the games that appear on the channel, then do check us out on Patreon or right here on YouTube as a channel member. I think it's a pretty great community over there, and we'd love to have some more people join us. But with that out of the way, let's talk about our opponents this week and see how our Mahadi deck can do in a game. So starting off with some opponents you may recognize, we have Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, being played by Mort, Teysa, Opulent Oligarch, being played by Jason, and Iron Man, Titan of Innovation, being played by Bilal. Now, 2 weeks ago, we put up an Anam Pakal game. This was the setup for that game as well. That game actually ended pretty quickly. No spoilers if you haven't seen it. But we ended so quickly, we decided to get in a second game, so all of our opponents brought back the same decks. Again, no spoilers, but you may be able to guess why. So, starting off with Mort and his Crick deck, this is definitely a deck that I am concerned about. I know Crick is very powerful, and Mort has mentioned he tried to make Crick not that bad, but in my experience, Crick is almost always busted no matter what, so I am very concerned about whatever he's got going on over there. Moving on to Jason and his Teysa deck. This is a deck I have faced down multiple times, and it is very powerful, very efficient at making tokens, whether it's clues, spirits, or anything else. So I am very nervous about this deck as well. I think that with a combination of Teysa and our own deck, it's going to be a very fast game. I imagine we're going to do a ton of damage very quickly, so we'll see how that one goes. And then last but not least, we have Bilal playing Iron Man, Titan of Innovation, and this is definitely the deck I am the most concerned about. He has mentioned that this is actually a treasure build of Iron Man, but I do know that having a tutor in the command zone can be incredibly powerful, so I'm very nervous to see what Bilal has cooked up with some of the higher mana cost artifacts. Anyway though, Those are our opponents for this week. Let me know down in the comments if you have any predictions for who you think may walk out the winner. But other than that, I hope you all enjoyed the deck tech. I hope you will enjoy the game. If you have and or will, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Mort goes first, followed by Jason, Bilal, and then myself. On Mort's first turn, he plays a swamp. Jason also plays a swamp. Bilal plays a command tower. I play a Desert of the Fervent. Mort plays another swamp. Jason plays a Tainted Field and casts Pearl Medallion, making all his white spells cost 1 less to cast. Bilal plays a Mountain and casts Generous Plunderer, now making himself and target opponent a treasure token in his upkeep, and, whenever it attacks, doing damage to defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Dragonspark Reactor, putting a charge counter on it whenever an artifact enters under my control, and being able to sacrifice it for 4 mana to do damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target player and target creature. Mort plays an Urborg to move Yawgmoth, turning all lands into swamps in addition to their other types, then cast Phyrexian Arena, letting him draw a card and lose a life in his upkeep. Jason plays a Plains and casts his commander, Teysa Opulent Oligarch, now investigating in his end step for each opponent that lost life that turn, and once per turn, creating a 1/1 spirit token whenever a clue goes to his graveyard from the battlefield. In Bilal's upkeep, he and Jason both make a treasure token, then he plays a Storm-Carved Coast and casts Academy Manufactor. So now, if he would create a clue, treasure, or food token, he instead creates one of each. On my turn, I play a swamp and cast my commander, Mahadi Emporium Master, creating a number of treasures in my end step equal to the number of creatures that died during my turn. In Mort's upkeep, he draws a card and loses a life, then plays an Amonkhet Raceway, setting his speed to 1, and casts Bontu's Monument, making his black creatures cost 1 less to cast, and whenever he casts a creature, he gains a life and each of his opponents lose a life. After that, he also casts an Expedition map, then passes. On Jason's turn, he cast a Loyal Subordinate, now making each opponent lose 3 life at the beginning of combat on his turn, as long as he controls his commander, which he currently does, so when he moves to combat this turn, each of his opponents lose 3 life. Then he attacks Mort for 2 with Teysa, and when he moves to his end step, he creates 3 clue tokens since all 3 of his opponents lost life this turn. In Bilal's upkeep, both he and I create a treasure token, but Bilal also creates a food and clue token. After that, Bilal plays an Inventor's Fair and casts Storm the Vault, creating a treasure token whenever 1 or more creatures he controls deals combat damage to a player. However, that's not relevant as it immediately transforms in his end step since Bilal controls 5 or more artifacts, turning into Vault of Cataclan, which can tap for blue mana equal to the number of artifacts he controls. On my turn, I cast a Mirkwood Bats, making each opponent lose a life whenever I create or sacrifice a token. Then I play a Rakdos Carnarium, returning a swamp to my hand, and finally I attack Mort for 3 with Mahadi and pass. In Mort's upkeep, he draws a card and loses a life, then sacrifices Expedition Map to search his library for a land, in this case Cabal Coffers, putting it into his hand. He then plays the Cabal Coffers for turn, and uses it to cast his commander, also paying 6 life, Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, now putting a +1/+1 counter on him whenever Mort casts a black spell, and letting him spend 2 life instead of any black mana in the costs of spells or abilities. This triggers Bontu's Monument, letting Mort gain a life while each of his opponents lose a life, increasing his speed to 2. Once that resolves, he also casts the Sib-Sig Ceremony, paying 6 life, putting a counter on Crick, making his creatures cost 2 less to cast, but also destroying any creature that enters his battlefield if it was cast, replacing it with a 2/2 zombie druid token. This lets him cast Ancient Cellar Spawn for 4 life, putting a counter on Crick, gaining a life, and making each of his opponents lose a life. Before it can resolve though, Jason cast Reprieve, returning the spell to Mort's hand and drawing a card. While this doesn't stop Mort from recasting the Cellar Spawn, it does force him to pay an additional 4 life, while he puts another counter on Crick, gains a life, and makes each opponent lose a life. Then, when the Cellar Spawn enters, it's destroyed and Mort creates a zombie druid token. However, before the trigger to destroy it can resolve, Mort casts Supernatural Stamina, now returning the Cellar Spawn to play when it dies this turn, immediately returning it to play permanently since it was no longer cast. After that has resolved, Mort casts Grey Merchant of Asphodel, paying 4 life, putting a counter on Crick, gaining a life, making each opponent lose a life, making Jason lose 5 life, destroying it when it enters, making a zombie druid, and then making each opponent lose life equal to his devotion to black, which is 12, while he gains life equal to the life lost this way, which is 36. On Jason's turn, he cast Mondrak Glory Dominus, now doubling the number of tokens he would create. Then he moves to combat, triggering Loyal Subordinate and making each of his opponents lose 3 life. Finally, Jason moves to his end step and creates 6 more clues. In Bilal's upkeep, he gains a life from Inventor's Fair since he controls 3 or more artifacts, makes a treasure, food, and clue token while Jason makes 2 treasure tokens, plays an island, and casts Zorn, now creating an additional treasure token whenever he would create a treasure. After that, he casts his commander, Iron Man, Titan of Innovation, and in response, Jason activates Mondrak's ability, paying 4 life and sacrificing 2 clues to put an indestructible counter on it. This also triggers Teysa, so he makes 2 spirit tokens as well. Then, Bilal moves to combat, attacking Mort with Iron Man for 4 since he has haste, creating 2 treasure tokens, 2 food tokens, and 2 clue tokens, sacrificing a food and searching his library for an artifact with mana value 1 since the sacrificed artifact had a mana value of 0, putting it into play. This lets him put a Soul Ring into play. On my turn, I play a Swamp, then cast Body Dropper, putting a +1/+1 counter on it whenever I sacrifice a creature, and letting me pay 2 mana to sacrifice another creature and give it Menace until the end of turn. Then, I cast a Footlight Fiend, which does 1 damage to any target when it dies. I immediately activate Body Dropper to sacrifice the Footlight Fiend, putting a counter on it, doing 1 damage to Mort, and, at the end of turn, making a treasure token since a creature died this turn, making each of my opponents lose a life. In Mort's upkeep, he draws a card and loses a life, then pays 4 life and casts Diabolic Tutor, putting a counter on Crick, doing 2 damage to Bilal, and then searching his library for a card, putting it into his hand and immediately casting it, which is Animate Dead, returning Grey Merchant to play, making me lose a life, putting a counter on Crick, and making each of his opponents lose 13 life since his devotion to Thirst 13, while he gains 39. After that resolves, Mort pays 4 life to cast Clackbridge Troll, letting me create 3 0/1 goat tokens. On cast, each of Mort's opponents lose a life while he gains a life, knocking Jason out of the game. Then, the Cellar Spawn also does 5 damage to Bilal, knocking him out of the game as well, or at least it would, if Bilal weren't able to sacrifice 2 food tokens to gain 6 life, going to 3 instead. Then, when the troll enters, I make 3 goat tokens, triggering Mirkwood Bats to make each of my opponents lose 3 life, this time actually knocking Bilal out of the game. Finally, with the trigger for the troll to be destroyed and replaced with a zombie druid, Mort pays 2 life to cast Malakir Rebirth, returning the troll to the battlefield when it dies, doing 2 damage to me and giving me 3 more goats. This guarantees Bilal can't save himself with another food token. And finally, Mort is able to pay 4 life to cast an Oubliette, doing 2 more damage to me, knocking me out and winning Mort the game. All right, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a very fast game. There was a lot going on in that game, and Mort really just kind of popped off. I mentioned earlier that he tried to make it as low powered as possible for Crick, but he mentioned that he needed to find ways to gain life, and then if he was gaining life in mono black, that meant that he should probably play Gray Merchant, and then he fell into the trap that a lot of mono black decks do, which is play Gray Merchant and win the game. So definitely a very powerful showing by Crick, very impressive. And we had a couple of turns to try to deal with it, we just could not quite find any interaction. Moving on around the table to Jason, his Tesa deck also did very well. He had quite the setup going. He was able to generate pretty much 6 clues every single turn, which is very impressive. He just unfortunately couldn't do anything with it. He had the setup and not the payoffs, so I think if he'd had a little bit more time, he definitely would have been a threat to be reckoned with in that game. And then, of course, Bilal, our next opponent in the game. Very cool to see Iron Man be used as a treasure commander. I think that the fact that Bilal only swung one time and upgraded a treasure into a soul ring, while still very powerful, obviously, wasn't quite game-winningly powerful, and I think that he, like Jason, if had been given a little bit more time, probably would have walked away the winner, but definitely something to be aware of in future games with Iron Man. And then last but not least, of course, our deck. We got off to a bit of a slow start. We definitely had the tap land hand at the beginning of the game. So a little bit unfortunate that we couldn't quite find any of our devils until right before the end. We were able to get a little bit of damage in, make a little bit of treasure, and do a little bit of what we were trying to do. We just couldn't quite get the wheels spinning fast enough. So a little bit unfortunate, but I still think it was a very good showing for what the deck is capable of doing. It just hopefully will happen faster next time. Anyway though, if you have any suggestions for future cards you would like to see me build around, please do drop those in the comments. And if you have any interest in anything else that we have brewing up for this channel, please stick around. I've got a lot of stuff that I'm hoping to bring along in the future, but I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope that you all have already liked the video. If not, please do, and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.